Okay, so the last thing I need to tell you about in this outline is the Muller v. Oregon case. So this is what's going to be known as it's going to create what's going to be known as protective labor legislation. And we can also connect this to the Triangle Strike and Fire and the Women's Trade Union League. Because what happens is you start to get protective labor legislation for women and children. And this says that women that children can't work, as they shouldn't be working, and that women's hours, because they're mothers, are reduced and they're given a minimum wage. Now, these are things that we should want just for people, right? For everyone to have like decent working hours and be paid at the very least, a minimum wage. What happens is when you only give it to women, you're suggesting that somehow they need to be protected, and you're also linking them with children, which is, a little problematic. At the time, though, that's a modern perspective, because at the time, protective labor legislation for the women's rights movement is seen as a huge, huge victory when protective labor legislation is passed. It's seen as like we have seriously won, right? That we've got a minimum amount of hours that women can work, and we've got minimum wage for them. What happens, though, is it ends up restricting them from jobs, the jobs that are usually the most lucrative and the ones that are the best paid. And so there is a case that goes to the Supreme Court. It's Muller v. Oregon, to determine the legality of protective labor legislation. And what the court decides as a result of this case is that sex is a valid basis of classification. I think I put that on your outline. Let me pull it up here to make sure. I did. It is on your outline. But again, let me repeat it. Sex is a valid basis of classification is what the Supreme Court decides. And what this means is that you can classify the sexes differently. You can treat the sexes differently. So what the Muller v. Oregon case decides is it upholds protective labor legislation. It keeps protective labor legislation in place and says, again, that you can treat women workers differently from men workers. Let me repeat that again, though. That's seen as like a huge victory at the time for most women in the women's rights movement, because this is something that they had worked towards, right? I mean, looked at that seal that they were upholding the home by arguing for a living wage and decent working hours. So it's seen as a victory, but from a modern perspective, it's seen as like a setback, because you're suggesting that women need protection and that they aren't equal in their working abilities to other adults. Okay, if you've got questions about that, be sure to leave that in the discussion module. Take care. Bye-bye.